Hey everybody, it's that guy who checks your sources here, and today we're going to be going over Paul Joseph Watson's video, Global Warming is a Crock of Shit. I came across this video by debating with some denier on Facebook, and he posted it. I watched it, and I looked for links in description to his news articles and sources he uses, and I couldn't find any, so that raised the red flag and is why I decided to go over it. So to not waste any time, let's get right into it.
Man-made climate change is a crock of shit. Corrupt, agenda-driven scientists have been caught over and over again faking temperature data to fool everyone into thinking that global warming is real.
So his first source is from The Telegraph, which is a news website I wouldn't even rely on to tell me what time of the day it was. It says fiddling with the temperature data is the biggest science scandal ever. Um, I was going to prove this wrong because just last week I showed somebody why there was no conspiracy theory of NOAA changing the data to fit the global warming agenda or whatever, but that would more than double the length of this video, and I didn't really feel like doing it because it's a headache. But I did come across this video, which is someone who did just that. He goes and looks at all the data and actually shows like scientifically why um, the data hasn't been changed to fit global warming. So you can check this out. It's only 10 minutes 45 seconds. It's really great, but I just didn't want to make an hour-long video.
There's been no global warming since the late 90s.
He uses this picture, no global warming for 18 years, 8 months. It looks like it's just he went into Google and typed in no global warming for 18 years, and it looks like he's the second one to come up, which is from climatechangedispatch.com. I mean, this is just satellite data of the troposphere, which is only one line of data, and they use multiple lines of data when determining the global mean temperature of the planet. And if we look at the anomalies, we can see that the temperature is still rising. Yes, there was a peak here, but the overall temperature of the planet is still rising. Now imagine, I'll put it this way simply so everyone can understand. Imagine if you had a 50 in a class. Your grade was a 50, and you got, since this is 1998, let's say you got a 98 on a homework, right? And it brought up your grade. Then, over the next 5 homeworks, let's say you got between an 85 and a 90. That would also bring up your grade. It would not, it wouldn't not bring up your grade because you didn't get a 98. It still brings up your overall average, just not as much as the 98 does. And what they're trying to say is that, oh, because we haven't peaked as high as 98 did just in the troposphere, not in the overall temperature of the planet with multiple lines of data, but just in the troposphere, that means the planet isn't warming. I mean, I'm not sure how stupid you got to be to believe in this or not be able to, figure this out on your own, but that's what they're saying. And it just doesn't make sense when you're dealing with the global mean temperature. That's not how it works. And again, we can see here that, yes, there was a peak in 1998. And when you're analyzing multiple lines of data, the planet still has warmed. However, you see that the mean doesn't go up with the peak here. This just gets averaged into it. And that's how we determine what the temperature of the planet is, because if you just take 1 year anomalies, then you're never going to be able to determine anything, because 1 year you could say, oh, the planet is warming at an alarming rate, and then the next year you say, oh, it's cooling a little bit. So you're not going to get anywhere. That's why you average it and you do means.
In 2007 and 2009, scientists said that the Arctic would have ice-free summers by 2013.
Okay, so he then put up this BBC news article, Arctic Summers Ice Free by 2013. And this really drives home the point that he only looks at the headlines, it doesn't read the actual article. So here we have a professor whose name I cannot pronounce. He says that he told the American Geophysical Union in a meeting that you could expect to see ice-free summers in the Arctic by 2013. However, if you go and actually read the rest of the article, you see that there are scientists who disagree with him, like here Professor Peter from Cambridge University, who's an expert on Arctic ice. He goes and says, in the end, it will just melt away quite suddenly, referring to the Arctic sea ice. It may not be as early as 2013, but it will be soon, much earlier than 2040. And then we can go down here, and another scientist from the U.S. National Snow and Ice Data Center, Dr. Mark, who says, a few years ago, I was even thinking 2050, 2070, out beyond the year 2100, because that's what our models were telling us. But as we've seen, models aren't fast enough right now. We're losing ice at a much more rapid rate. And then he goes on to say, my thinking is that 2030 is not an unreasonable date to be thinking of. He then states, I think, and then he uses the original professor's name who predicted 2013, whose name I can't pronounce, is probably a little aggressive in his projections. So we have two scientists that disagree with him. They say it will be sooner rather than later, but probably not 2013. 2013 is a possibility, but it's probably not going to happen. And again, you could figure that out yourself if you just read the article. And if we look at northern hemisphere sea ice over decades, we can see that it is on a downward trend, and it is reasonable to think and scientifically accurate to state that eventually we will have ice-free summers, and at the rate it is decreasing, especially recently, it will be sooner rather than later.
By the summer of 2015, Arctic sea ice was the thickest it's been in almost 10 years. Antarctic sea ice also hit a record maximum in 2014.
He then shows this graph as if he's trying to prove something. However, just like with the temperature in 1998, 1 year anomalies mean nothing. It's the observed trend over decades because that's what climate is. And if we look at the observed trend, Arctic sea ice is diminishing. And I'll wait to get to the Antarctic sea ice in a minute because it comes up again in his next source.
NASA now admits that the polar ice caps are not melting.
So this is his Forbes source. Before we get into the source, though, it's from James Taylor, the same James Taylor from the fossil fuel-funded libertarian think tank, the Heartland Institute. So anything he says regarding climate change, he has a conflict of interest, so he's already discredited. But we'll look at the source anyway. Global warming not causing any polar ice retreat. He goes to state a bunch of things. However, if we look at the global sea ice area, we can see that the daily global sea ice anomaly here, we're now setting new minimums, not reaching the maximums that we used to as often, and we are now mostly below the mean, where we used to almost always be above the mean. And here, daily sea ice area, we used to reach these nice high maximums. Now we just reach nice new minimums, and we don't reach the maximums anymore that we used to. And you may be wondering, well, it's not that much of a downward trend. In fact, it looks like it goes up here a little bit, and we have this anomaly here. However, this is global sea ice area, not just the Arctic or Antarctic. And if we look at just the northern hemisphere, the Arctic sea ice, we can see that it's at a nice downward trend. However, the Arctic and Antarctic are two completely different places, and they respond to changing climate in different ways. That's why we call it climate change, because uh, the globe responds in different ways in different parts. So um, the Arctic is just all sea ice. It's an ocean, and the Antarctic is a landmass, is a continent. And Antarctica is, and it's surrounded by just oceans. So research suggests that changes in Antarctic sea ice, both where it is increasing and where it's decreasing, but it is at a net increase, are caused in part by a strengthening of the westerly winds that flow unhindered in a circle above the Southern Ocean. So because the winds are changing, because of climate change, there's more ice. So to say that we reached a maximum of sea ice in Antarctic in 2014 does not refute climate change. Well, first off, 1 year anomalies mean nothing. Second of all, we know that the Earth responds differently all over the globe to climate change. That's why we call it climate change.
In 2005, the United Nations predicted there would be 50 million climate refugees by 2010.
So we just claimed that the UN prediction of 50 million climate refugees by the end of the decade, 2010, never came to be true. Which that prediction did not come true. So that statement is almost true. However, The UN did not make that prediction. Instead, it was made by Professor Norman Myers from Oxford in 2005. The UN did make a map of his predictions based off of his report here, which you can look at. However, when it came not to be true, they removed it. The UN did not comment on the accuracy of this claim because they did not produce it. So the UN did not make this prediction, which he could have figured that out with just a little bit of research.
In 2003, the Pentagon released a report predicting that by 2013, climate change would flood California with inland seas and that parts of the Netherlands would be unlivable.
So this is the Pentagon report he is talking about, and yes, it does claim the things that he said it did. However, they left a very, very, very important message at the beginning. They said, "We have created a climate change scenario that, although not the most likely, is plausible." Let me read that again. Although not the most likely, not the most likely. Even here in red, they said, imagining the unthinkable. So this was a big what if scenario, the worst of worst cases scenario. It was something that could potentially happen, but probably not. Mathematically, did it work? Yes. But were we really worried about this happening? No. They just wanted to know how would we, the US, be able to respond if this happened. Now, he could have figured this out if he just did a little research, however, it doesn't fit his narrative.
In 2000, climate change alarmists said that it would cease to snow in Britain. In 2009, London had its heaviest snowfall in decades, and in 2010, the UK had its coldest winter since records began.
So then he cites this news article, which I couldn't find anywhere, and I had to get it from whatsupwiththat.worldpress.com, which is ironic because it's climate change, not our website. But after reading it, I found that this is just an opinion piece by an author who took a bunch of quotes out of context to make an interesting article. Its snowfalls are now just a thing of the past. However, his next statement, or the one right before this, I forget, kind of reinforces what they said here. One of the doctors was quoted, "Heavy snow will return occasionally, but when it does, we will be unprepared. We're really going to get caught out. Snow will probably cause chaos in 20 years' time." And he goes on, or just before this, said that the UK had one of the heaviest snows one year. I think it was 2009 or something like that, around there. And the UK just had the coldest winter in over 100 years. Again, 1 year anomalies mean nothing. We already established that. However, if we look at the observed trend of days of snow falling, decade by decade, the average number of days is decreasing. And if we look at days of snow lying on the ground, that is also decreasing. And if we look at visible snow in the northern hemisphere, that is also in decline. And if we look at, over Eurasia, and if we look at snow over the northern hemisphere this time, that is also in a decline. So to say that snow will eventually be a thing of the past for the UK is true, because if we continue following this trend, it will be a thing of the past. And Paul has been proven an idiot time and time again because he only reads the headlines and doesn't do any research.
Increasing CO2 emissions, a byproduct of capitalism, are directly linked to prosperity and higher quality of life.
And no shit, Sherlock, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out CO2 is linked to GDP. We live in a civilization that is completely based off of fossil fuels. So if we produce more goods, we're going to use more fossil fuels. If we produce less goods, we will use less fossil fuels. And CO2 is not a byproduct of capitalism. It is a byproduct of an industrialized civilization. And I'm not going to get into his whole conspiracy theory about how this is some plot to destroy capitalism, because I'm just concerned about the science aspect of it. I don't care about that.
Solar power and wind are virtually useless.
So the Daily Caller is just a right-wing news source here in America, and they cite this report from the Institute for Energy Research. Here's the report. But it's good to know that the board of directors for this institute, for lack of a better word, are shady. In fact, Wayne Gable, one of them, is directly linked to the Koch brothers, who made $117 million last year from their fossil fuel company. anything this institute produces is going to have a bias towards fossil fuels.
And wind turbines are even worse. They're ridiculously expensive and in many cases emit more CO2 than they save.
So this is another thing from the Telegraph. Wind farms will create more carbon dioxide, says scientists. Goes on to quote these three scientists in their statement in Nature. I actually went and found their statement in Nature. You can see it here. However, they had to go and add a comment because people were misquoting them. They said about their statement, avoid constructing wind farms on peat has resulted in a misunderstanding of the intended message. With good management, our calculations show that carbon savings are possible for wind farms constructed on many peat sites. It is development on non-degraded peats that should be avoided. After 2025, assuming low carbon electricity generation, wind farms on non-degraded peat sites are unlikely to give net carbon benefit, and technological advances would be needed to achieve savings. So they are in no way saying whatsoever that wind farms will produce more CO2 than fossil fuel sources do. They're simply stating that you need to be smart about where you put your wind farms and how you construct them so that in the future you won't have to spend more money to make sure that you still have net carbon savings.
Green subsidies should all be switched into research and development of technological breakthroughs.
So he says that Gates said we should stop putting all R&D into renewables or stop putting all subsidies into renewables and switch to R&D. However, Gates never said this. In the Financial Times, which that article quoted, he says most of the people you talk to would say we should double or triple the amount of renewables R&D. And right now we only put $6 billion into R&D and renewables every year, and we put a total of $100 billion into renewable subsidies. So even if we were to triple the $6 billion, that would still only be 18% of what we put into renewable subsidies. And last time I checked, 18% was not 100%.
First, they called it global warming, and then when global warming stopped, they called it climate change. Now it's extreme weather conditions.
Well, actually, climate change and global warming have been used together since at least 1975, and both terms have been used separately before then. And there have been other terms that are used but were dropped because uh, they don't resonate with the public as well. And one of the main reasons we switch from global warming to climate change is because the scientific literacy of the general population, especially here in America. And climate change encompasses global warming, but refers to the broader range of changes that are happening. Just because the planet is getting warmer doesn't mean that your area is necessarily just going to get warmer year after year. The Earth is a dynamic system, and it responds in different ways to an overall change in the temperature of the planet, whether it be warming or cooling.
Despite the fact that extreme weather conditions are becoming less extreme.
And we actually are having more extreme weather events. Just this year, we broke 2 records for hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons. We beat the previous record for just the total number. This year we had 30 major hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones. The previous was 23, and 25 of the ones we had this year were Category 4 or Category 5, well above the previous record of 18.
We're actually about to enter into a new mini ice age, which is a shame because natural global warming actually produces a greener, more fruitful planet and increases the range and diversity of species.
No, we're not going to be heading for a new mini ice age. Even the author of the study on the solar minimum that will supposedly cool the planet says the sun buys us time to stop these carbon emissions. The next minimum might give the Earth a chance to reduce adverse effects from global warming. And if we look at the past solar minimum here, this cooling in the planet will have such a minimal effect on our total warming because of how fast it's going and how much the planet is going to warm. So it buys us time, it will mask the effect, maybe slow down the warming, but we are not heading for a new mini ice age. And I'd just like to thank him for really driving home the point that this is not natural warming, and that's why we have to be worried. Thanks, guys, for watching the video. Head on over to Facebook and give our page a like for updates on when new videos come out, and other climate change related content. Also, links to any of the sources I use in this video are available in the description of the video, and if you have any other sources that a denier sent to you or you found them posting, you can send it over to me and I'll take a look at it and I might make a video out of it for the YouTube channel.